I was standing at the checkout counter, sliding a carton of milk toward the cashier, when a small hand wrapped tightly around my arm. I looked down to see a little girl staring up at me with wide, desperate eyes. "Mom, can we go home now?" she asked, her voice trembling as if she had been holding back tears for hours. My breath caught. "Sweetie, I'm not your mom." The cashier stopped scanning and stared at us. The girl lifted her finger and pointed at my cheek. "You have the same birthmark," she said, touching her own face where a faint crescent-shaped mark curved beneath her eye, an exact match to mine. Before I could speak, a man came rushing over. He was tall, sharply dressed, with a forced smile that didn't reach his eyes. He gripped the girl's arm and pulled her to his side. "She's my daughter," he said quickly. "Sorry if she bothered you." The girl looked at me over her shoulder, her lips moving soundlessly. I didn't know what she was trying to say, but the fear in her eyes was unmistakable. As they turned toward the door, I felt the weight in my shopping bag shift. Above us, the store's security camera swiveled, catching every second, including whatever she had just slipped inside. Saturday mornings in my town always felt calm, almost too quiet. The streets were lined with tall maples, their leaves turning gold in the early October chill. I had driven the 10 minutes from my small apartment to Whitmore's Market, the local grocery store my family had shopped at for decades. My mother, Janet, had asked me to pick up a few things for her. She was recovering from knee surgery and couldn't get around easily. Since Dad passed away 5 years ago, I had been her main help for errands, repairs, and anything that needed a steady pair of hands. I walked into the store with a list folded in my jacket pocket, the familiar chime above the door greeting me like an old friend. Inside, the air smelled faintly of fresh bread from the bakery section. I grabbed a cart and started down the aisles, ticking off items one by one, vegetables for her soup, milk for my morning coffee, and a loaf of rye bread that Mom liked with butter. Every aisle had its regulars. Mr. Bailey, the retired high school coach, was comparing cereal prices like he was preparing for a championship game. The Dawson twins were chasing each other near the frozen section while their tired-looking father tried to corral them. I had grown up seeing these same faces, year after year. It was the kind of town where strangers were rare, and anything unusual was instantly noticed. I turned the corner toward the dairy section and spotted Marcy at Register 3. Marcy had been a cashier at Whitmore's since I was a teenager. She was the kind of person who remembered everyone's birthday and knew the names of their pets. She gave me a small wave as I walked past with my cart. I smiled back, already planning to ask how her grandson's baseball tournament went last weekend. The store wasn't busy, which meant I'd be out quickly. I loaded the last few items into the cart and wheeled toward Marcy's lane. Ahead of me, a little girl stood near the gum display, her hands folded in front of her. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old. She had pale blonde hair cut into a neat bob, and her coat looked a size too big for her small frame. She glanced at me as I moved into line. Her eyes were a pale, icy blue, and there was something in the way she studied me, like she was searching for something she desperately wanted to find. I smiled politely and looked away, assuming she was waiting for a parent nearby. Marcy started scanning my groceries, chatting about the weather and how the cold seemed to be arriving earlier this year. I reached for my wallet, half listening, half thinking about getting back to Mom's to start cooking. That was when I felt the hand on my arm. The grip was small but urgent. I turned, and there she was, closer now, her blue eyes locked on mine. Her voice was soft but clear. "Mom, can we go home now?" The words knocked the air out of me. For a moment, I couldn't respond. I looked around automatically, expecting someone to step forward and correct her, but no one moved. I managed to say, "Sweetie, I'm not your mom." The sound of my own voice felt strange in my ears, calm, steady, but underneath, my pulse had started to race. Marcy's hands froze mid-motion, a carton of eggs hovering above the scanner. Her gaze shifted from me to the girl, reading the tension that had suddenly filled the space between us. The girl shook her head, still holding on to my arm. "Yes, you are. You have the same birthmark." She raised her hand and touched her own cheek, just under her right eye. I instinctively touched mine. The faint crescent-shaped mark had been there since I was born. I'd always thought it was unique. My mother had the same mark in the same spot, and she used to joke it was the Whitmore family stamp. Before I could ask her what she meant, a tall man appeared. He moved quickly, almost too quickly, like he'd been watching from just out of sight. He was sharply dressed in a dark coat and pressed trousers. His expression was controlled, but there was something in his eyes that made me uneasy. He took the girl's arm firmly and pulled her to his side. "Lila," he said, his tone clipped. "What are you doing? Come here." Turning to me, he forced a tight smile. "She's my daughter. Sorry if she bothered you." The girl's small frame stiffened under his grip. She looked back at me over her shoulder, her lips moving silently. I tried to read them but couldn't make out the words. There was fear in her eyes. Undeniable, raw fear. As he began steering her toward the store's entrance, I felt my stomach twist. I didn't know what had just happened, but I knew it wasn't right. My thoughts were interrupted by a faint sound from my shopping bag, a soft rustle like something had been dropped inside. I glanced down. The reusable bag sat open in the cart. The man was halfway to the door now, the girl glancing back one last time before they disappeared into the sunlight outside. Marcy leaned slightly over the counter, her voice low but urgent. "Clara, check your bag." My hands moved automatically. I parted the top of the bag and saw something wedged between the bread and the carton of milk, a folded piece of paper. My pulse quickened as I looked up at the black, dome-shaped security camera mounted directly above us. It had caught everything, from the girl's first words to whatever she had just slipped into my groceries. I didn't know it yet, but this was the moment everything in my quiet, predictable life was about to change. I stared at the folded paper buried between my groceries. My fingers hesitated over it for a moment, a strange heaviness pressing on my chest. Marcy leaned forward just enough for me to see the concern in her eyes. "Go ahead and look," she urged quietly. I pulled the paper out. It was small, torn unevenly from something larger. My thumb brushed over the faint dents of hurried handwriting. In pencil, the words were crooked, but clear. "Help me. He's not my dad. My real mom has this birthmark." The air felt colder. I read the message again, hoping I had misunderstood, but the meaning was painfully obvious. My hands tightened around the paper. "Marcy," I said, my voice lower than I expected, "did you see her put this in?" She gave a quick nod. "She slid it in while you were paying." I didn't want to say anything in front of him. I looked toward the wide glass doors at the front of the store. Through them, I could see the man walking across the parking lot, holding the girl's hand. He opened the back door of a black SUV and guided her inside. She sat stiffly, her head turning once toward the store as if she was trying to keep me in sight. I felt an instinctive pull to act. "Call the police," I told Marcy, already moving toward the exit. She picked up the phone at her register. "I'll tell them what happened. Go." I pushed my cart aside and walked quickly toward the doors. The automatic sensors opened with a soft whoosh, letting in the crisp bite of October air. The man was climbing into the driver's seat. I shouted, "Wait!" But he didn't look back. The engine roared to life. The SUV pulled out faster than it should have in a crowded parking lot. I jogged after it, my shoes slapping against the pavement, memorizing the license plate as best I could. The taillights flashed red before the car disappeared onto the main road. When I went back inside, the store manager, Tom, was already at Marcy's register. He was a broad-shouldered man in his early 50s, and his face was set in a grim line. "What's going on?" he asked. Marcy handed him the phone. "We have a possible abduction. Clara has a note from the girl. Security camera saw the whole thing." Tom's eyes widened. "Let me see that." I passed him the paper, and he read it silently before looking up at me. "We need to pull the footage now." He gestured for me to follow him to the small office near the back of the store. Inside, the faint hum of electronics filled the air. He sat down at the computer and brought up the security feed from Register 3. We watched it together. The girl stood near the gum display, watching me unload my cart. She waited until the man was out of sight before stepping forward, grabbing my arm and speaking. When I turned toward her, she pointed at my cheek. Then, while I was looking at her face, her other hand reached into my bag and slipped the folded paper inside. Seconds later, the man appeared from the bread aisle, his movements quick and direct. He took her arm, said something neither of us could hear, and steered her toward the exit. The footage showed her looking back at me, lips moving in what I now knew were silent pleas for help. Tom leaned back in his chair. "We're keeping this footage for the police. They'll be here any minute." My heart was pounding hard enough that I could feel it in my fingertips. Do you think he noticed she gave me this? I asked, holding up the note. Tom shook his head slowly. If he did, he wouldn't have let her anywhere near you. I think she took a huge risk. Marcy knocked on the open door. The police are on their way. They want you to stay here until they arrive. I sat down in the empty chair beside Tom, trying to quiet the storm in my mind. This girl, Lila, if that was her name, had chosen me out of everyone in that store. She had seen the mark on my cheek and decided it meant I could be trusted. I thought about her pale eyes and the way she held my arm, as if letting go meant losing her last chance. Minutes later, 2 uniformed officers stepped into the office. One of them, a woman with sharp features and dark hair pulled into a bun, introduced herself as Officer Rachel Moore. Her partner, Officer Sam Reed, was taller, with an easy but focused manner. Officer Moore sat down across from me. We've been told you had direct contact with the child. Can you walk us through everything, from the moment you noticed her to when she left? I told them everything. The first glance, her sudden approach, her claim that I was her mother, the birthmark, the man's arrival, and the note. I described the SUV and gave them the partial plate number I had memorized. Officer Reed examined the note, then placed it in a clear evidence bag. We'll check if this matches any active missing child cases. Did she seem frightened? Yes, I said firmly. She looked terrified, and whatever he is to her, she didn't want to leave with him. Tom handed Officer Moore a USB drive. Here's the footage from the moment she approached Clara to when they drove off. Moore nodded. This will help. We'll issue an alert immediately. Ms. Whitmore, we may need to contact you again if we have more questions. As they left, Tom turned to me. You did the right thing. A lot of people would have ignored it or thought it was just a mix-up. I wasn't sure if I had done enough. The note was still burned into my mind, the shaky handwriting etched in my memory. Somewhere out there, that little girl was sitting in the back seat of a black SUV, watching the world pass by through the glass, wondering if anyone was coming for her. I didn't know it yet, but the next call I received from the police would turn this strange encounter into something far bigger than I could have imagined. I left the store that afternoon with my groceries in the back seat and the weight of the note still in my jacket pocket. The cold October air bit against my face as I sat in my car, replaying the encounter in my mind. The girl's voice, the way her small hand had gripped my arm, the pale blue eyes that held mine as if willing me to understand. It all felt impossible to set aside. I could have gone home and told myself it was now in the police's hands, but my gut wouldn't let me. Lila had chosen me. She could have handed that note to anyone, but she hadn't. I started my engine but didn't put the car in gear right away. Instead, I took out my phone and called my mother. Did you get everything? She asked. Yes, I said, trying to keep my voice even. But something happened at the store. I can't explain it yet. I might be late coming back. Clara, what's wrong? I'll tell you later. Just promise you'll stay inside. Lock the door. There was a pause before she said, All right, be careful. I ended the call and pulled out of the parking lot, my eyes scanning the side streets and driveways as if I might somehow spot that black SUV. I had memorized the first 3 characters of the plate and the dealership sticker on the back window. Halfway home, my phone rang. It was Officer Moore. We have an update. The child matches a missing persons report from New Hampshire. Her name is Lila Harper, age 7. She's been missing for 4 days. The weight in my chest tightened. Did you find them? Not yet, she said. But your description and the footage gave us a lead. The vehicle is registered to Ethan Caldwell. He has a prior record involving custody disputes. We have reason to believe he might try to leave the state. I need to ask if you'd be willing to come to the station and give a formal statement. Yes, I'll be there in 20 minutes. When I arrived, the station smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. Officer Moore met me at the front desk and led me to a small interview room. She asked me to go over everything again, this time in precise detail, while a recorder captured my statement. Did Lila say anything else besides calling you her mom and mentioning the birthmark? She asked. Number. But she mouthed something when he was pulling her away. I couldn't hear it. Moore nodded. We might be able to read her lips from the footage. Our tech team is working on it. She stepped out for a moment and I sat alone, staring at the note sealed inside the evidence bag on the table. The edges were frayed from where it had been torn and the pencil marks looked smudged in places, as if she'd been writing quickly, maybe hiding from him. When Moore returned, she had a printout of a map. "We believe Caldwell has family in western Massachusetts. If he's heading there, we might still intercept him. The problem is there are multiple back roads he could take, and we don't have eyes on all of them." "Then I can help," I said without thinking. "I grew up in that area. I know the roads." She studied me for a moment before answering. "This isn't without risk. If you see him, do not approach. Call us immediately." I agreed. Within half an hour, I was in my car again, this time with a clear purpose. My route took me along winding two-lane roads lined with pine trees and stone walls. My eyes scanned every vehicle that passed, searching for the glint of a black SUV. The first hour brought nothing but cold wind rattling the branches above. I stopped once for gas, my phone buzzing with brief updates from Moore. No sightings yet, but they were closing in on his likely route. I kept going, determined not to be the person who waited at home for someone else to act. Near sunset, I reached a small rural gas station. I pulled in to check the lot and froze. Parked at the far end, angled away from the pumps, was a black SUV with the same dealership sticker I had seen earlier. The back window was tinted, but in the reflection from the setting sun, I caught the outline of a small head in the rear seat. My pulse kicked hard. I moved past the station slowly, pulling into the lot of a diner across the road. I parked where I could see the SUV without being seen. My hands shook as I reached for my phone and dialed Officer Moore. "I think I found him," I said quickly, giving her the location. "I can see Lila in the back seat." "Stay put," she ordered. "We're 5 minutes out. Do not let him see you." The minutes felt like hours. I kept my eyes on the SUV, watching for any sign he might drive off. At one point, the driver's door opened and Caldwell stepped out. He glanced around before walking toward the gas station's mini-mart. The way he moved was cautious, scanning like a man who knew people might be looking for him. I saw the outline of Lila's face turn toward the window, her small hand pressing against the glass. Even from this distance, I could see the same fear and hope I had seen in the store. I raised my hand just slightly from the steering wheel, a silent promise that she wasn't alone. Red and blue lights appeared in the distance, cutting through the dimming sky. Caldwell emerged from the store, spotted them, and froze. For a moment, he seemed to consider running, but before he could make a move, 2 police cruisers boxed him in. Officers moved quickly, one of them opening the back door of the SUV and pulling Lila out. She was wrapped in a blanket within seconds, shielded from the scene, as Caldwell was pushed against the vehicle and handcuffed. I stayed where I was until Officer Moore walked over to my car. "She's safe," she said simply. "You did exactly what you needed to." Relief flooded through me, heavy and overwhelming. I looked past her to see Lila watching me from the safety of another officer's arms. Her lips moved again, and this time I could read them clearly. "Thank you." The cruiser pulled away with Caldwell inside, his head turned down and his wrists locked in steel. I stayed parked for a moment, gripping the steering wheel until the tension in my hands hurt. I had been bracing for hours, caught between fear and determination, and now the release left me almost lightheaded. Officer Moore waved me over to where she stood beside a second cruiser. Lila was sitting in the back seat of that car, bundled in a thick navy blanket. She looked smaller than I remembered from the store, her shoulders drawn in, her knees tucked under the fabric. When she saw me approach, she straightened and pressed her hand to the window. Moore opened the door and stepped aside. "She wants to talk to you before we take her to the child services team." I crouched down so we were eye level. Lila's voice was soft but steady. "I knew you would help me." "You were very brave," I told her. "That note, it was the smartest thing you could have done." She nodded, a tiny flicker of pride breaking through her exhaustion. "I saw the birthmark, and I thought maybe you were her." I frowned slightly. "Her?" "My mom," she said quietly. "He told me she didn't want me anymore, but I didn't believe him. I thought maybe he took me far away so I couldn't find her. When I saw you, I thought it was a sign." I didn't correct her. I just told her, "You're safe now, and they're going to take you to people who will make sure you get back to her." A social worker named Angela arrived a few minutes later. She was warm, calm, and gentle, introducing herself to Lila as she helped her into another vehicle. Before they drove off, Lila turned in her seat and gave me a small wave. I raised my hand in return, feeling something shift deep inside me. Moore walked me back toward my car. We've confirmed she was reported missing by her mother, Emily Harper, in New Hampshire. Emily and Caldwell dated briefly. When they broke up, he refused to return Lila after a weekend visit. He'd been keeping her hidden, moving her around to avoid being found. 4 days, I said quietly. Yes, Moore replied. But you should know this. When we interviewed her, she said she almost didn't approach you. She thought if she picked the wrong person, it might make him angry enough to take her farther away. She chose you because of that mark on your cheek. She thought it meant she could trust you. The words sank in, like a weight and a gift at the same time. Out of everyone in that store, she had taken a chance on me. A birthmark I had barely thought about my entire life had been her lifeline. Back at the station, they asked me to stay while they finalized my statement. I sat in a small break room with a cup of coffee that had gone cold in my hands, waiting as the activity hummed on the other side of the walls. At one point, I could hear Moore on the phone. Her tone was softer than before. I realized she was talking to Emily Harper, telling her they had her daughter. An hour later, Moore came back. Emily is on her way here tonight. She asked me to tell you that she's grateful beyond words. She wants to thank you herself. When Emily arrived, she moved quickly down the hallway, her hair pulled back, her coat unbuttoned, her eyes wide with the desperate urgency of a mother who had not slept in days. The moment she saw Lila, her entire face changed. They collided in an embrace so fierce it seemed to pull the air out of the room. Lila's small arms wrapped around her neck, her face pressed into her shoulder. Emily sobbed openly, holding her as if she would never let go again. I stepped back, giving them space. But then Emily looked up and found me. She came over, still holding her daughter's hand. "You're Clara?" I nodded. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "You're the reason she's here. If you hadn't listened to her, if you hadn't told the police..." She stopped, pulling in a shaky breath. "I don't have enough words." Lila squeezed her mother's hand, then looked at me. "Can we send her a picture when we're home?" Emily smiled through her tears. "Yes, we can do that." The formalities ended soon after. Caldwell was facing charges that would keep him from ever having contact with Lila again. Emily and Lila left the station together, walking side by side into the cool night air. I stood in the doorway and watched them go, the streetlight catching the faint curve of the birthmark under Lila's eye. When I finally drove home, the streets were quiet again, the same as they had been that morning. My groceries were still in the back seat, the milk sweating through its plastic jug, the bread slightly crushed under the weight of the vegetables. I carried them into my mother's house, and she met me at the door. "You look tired," she said, searching my face. "I am," I admitted, "but it's a good kind of tired." I unpacked the groceries while she made tea, and when we sat down at the kitchen table, I told her everything. Her hand found mine and squeezed. "Sometimes," she said, "we're put in the right place at the right time for a reason. That little girl will remember you for the rest of her life." I didn't tell her I would remember Lila just as long. That night, before I went to bed, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The faint crescent birthmark was there, as always, but it no longer felt like just a quirk of genetics. To one child, in one moment, it had been proof of safety and hope. The next morning, I woke to an email from Officer Moore. Attached was a photo of Lila at home, sitting at a kitchen table with a plate of pancakes in front of her. She was smiling wide, a stuffed bear tucked under one arm, and Emily was behind her with her hands resting on her shoulders. They both looked safe, warm, and exactly where they belonged. The message was short. "She asked me to send this to you. She said to tell you she's happy." I stared at that picture for a long time, thinking about how easily things could have gone differently. If I had brushed her off in the store, if I had assumed she was confused, if I had ignored the strange weight in my bag, she might still be missing. That thought stayed with me all day. I visited my mother later that afternoon. She was sitting by the window with her knitting basket beside her. I told her about the email, and she smiled softly. "It's not every day you get to be part of someone's rescue. You should feel proud." "I do," I admitted. "But more than that, I feel grateful. She trusted me with her only chance to get help. That's not something I'll forget. For the next few days, I kept in touch with Officer Moore. Caldwell remained in custody, facing charges that meant he would never have access to Lila again. Emily arranged for counseling to help Lila work through the fears she had been living with. One evening, I received a handwritten note in the mail. It was from Lila. Her handwriting was still uneven, but her message was clear. Thank you for listening when it mattered most. I pinned it to my fridge as a reminder that sometimes a single choice can change everything for someone else. When I finally returned to Whitmore's Market for groceries, Marcy greeted me with a hug. "The whole town's been talking about you," she said. "You gave that little girl her life back." I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a person who had been in the right place and decided not to look away. It made me wonder how many times we pass by someone who needs help but says nothing, and how often we mistake silence for safety. That experience taught me that trust can appear in unexpected ways. A matching birthmark, a shared look, a gut feeling you can't explain. When it comes, you have to decide whether you'll act on it. Lila did, and because of that, she's home. What would you have done if a child called you mom in public and begged for help? Have you ever been in a situation where you had to decide quickly if someone was in danger? Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us if you've ever faced something similar. Like this video, share it, comment your story, and subscribe to the channel for more true-to-life twists you won't forget.